So what I'd like to do in this video is explain my experience of living in 4 different countries, the US, Ireland, UK, and now France, and explain what those experiences have been like through the eyes of an American. So I lived in the US for most of my life, up until I was about 21, and I had lived in Ireland for about 4 years, then the UK for 10 years, and now in France for about a year. So I'll try and explain some of the cultural differences that I've experienced in each different country, as well as how it's affected me and changed my personality as I've moved from country to country. And also I think one of the joys about moving from one country to another is seeing the slight differences of how people live their daily lives. Basically how 2 cultures can have 2 totally different answers to the same issue. So when I moved over to Ireland, I noticed myself adapting to the way that they do things over there. And in America, it feels like people will judge you subtly if you're late. People are busy over there. They got places to be, things to do, people to see. And in contrast, it's almost unheard of in Ireland to be on time anywhere you're going. I would say the US, France, and the UK are similar on one side of the spectrum of being on time, versus Ireland, that's in a complete different category. And when I speak of punctuality, I talk about it mainly in a social setting. I can't tell you the amount of times I'd show up to a party and I'd be the first one there, arriving embarrassed and feeling like a goddamn idiot. And it wasn't until I realized that the time you're meant to arrive somewhere is really the time that you're meant to leave your flat. The commute time isn't factored into anything. So I had to shift my thinking, I had to shift my way of being more punctual into a more relaxed state. And that kind of permeated my experience over there. Over those 4 years, I felt myself much more relaxed when it came to being somewhere on time. I wasn't so stressed about the clock. On the opposite side of that, I noticed that the Irish perhaps ruined my ability to be on time. One thing I've noticed is that Brits and Americans, in terms of mindset, tend to live in the future. They're always planning, they're always looking forward to something, which culturally can take you outside the mindset of being present at all times. Versus in France, I've noticed that people live much more in the present moment. Now, the next thing I've noticed from living in multiple different countries is dealing with life's little speed bumps. So, when dealing with the French bureaucratic system, the default answer is no. And you continue the conversation from there. Can I open a bank account? Can I find a new flat? Default answer is no. Pas possible. And I think there's a divide here from Europe versus the US in that Americans can be overly friendly when you first meet them. For example, the amount of times I've been in LA and heard people say, yes, absolutely, oh my God, I'd love to catch up, let's go grab dinner, let's get drinks. And then crickets, nothing. Don't hear from them again. And I've been guilty of this myself. But what you have to realize is that there's no malice, there's no bad intent behind this. It's just part of the culture over there. I do it myself when I'm over there, but I never do it when I'm in the UK, France, or Ireland. So I guess when I'm in California, I have more doubts about the plans or opportunities to meet people when I'm over there. Now in France, it's the opposite. It's all about tests and testing you. I think I've run out my invitation at this place, so let's go somewhere new. So yeah, like I was saying, the French know how amazing it is over here, and they have set up tests and roadblocks. So yeah, it's like, do you really want to open up a bank account? Do you really want to try and find a flat here? Because, my God, there's going to be a lot of red tape, documents to get you through that process. You want to open up a bank account? What's your blood type? What's your inside leg measurement? They want to know everything about you before you give them your money. However, on the positive side of things, this process will teach you grit, perseverance in the face of all odds thrown at you, which are admirable traits. Now, for all my criticisms of the US, this is where you guys shine. The sense of can-do attitude, we can get things done, overrides everything else. The endless possibilities or infinite mindset of Americans is something that I love, and it's baked into the culture. You know, funnily enough, even though entrepreneur is a French word, I think the Americans embody it much more, and they practice what they preach more than anyone else I've seen in any other culture I've lived in. And sometimes Europeans look at me with this dumbfounded look whenever they hear my next business idea. Like, there's no possible way you could even think of doing that. And when I say it when I'm in California, they're like, absolutely, can-do attitude, go out there and be somebody. What am I doing? I'm making these fucking videos in Paris. I guess what I mean to say is there's much more of an encouraging attitude about entrepreneurship in America. Anyway, let's go grab a bike and go somewhere different. didn't call the songs. What a bad choice. On to my next point. If there's ever a better location, I couldn't think of one. Anyway, the point I was trying to make next is that in the States, I find that people are like overly polite, whether it's socially or in business. To mention criticism in a way that could be interpreted negatively to the receiving party in any way, shape, or form is almost a social taboo in America. So I think being supportive in this context can actually be a hindrance. People will dance around a subject in infinitum until you realize, what are we actually talking about here? Like, I can't tell you the amount of calls that I've been on for work with Americans or my American counterparts, and at the end of it, I'm left thinking, what did we actually sign off on? What are we gonna do next? And I think the reason for this is that this over-politeness, it doesn't want to come off as pushy or rude or bossy. And socially, I've noticed that the Irish are similar to Americans, but in slightly different ways. Now, what I love about the Irish is their ability to spin a yarn, to tell a story that is hilarious and captivating. Some of the most funny people I've ever met in my life have been Irish. Above all else, the Irish are there for a good time. They're there for the crack. If you haven't heard this term before, it basically means a deadly night out. It means everybody's there to elevate the atmosphere, to tell story, to just razz up each other. And the Brits would probably call this banter. Now, oppositely in business, I find the French more direct when they disapprove of something. Or perhaps a better way to describe it is that the French are more honest. And I think living in Paris gives you a thicker skin, and criticisms bounce off your back. And having experienced this in France, I'd actually much prefer this as opposed to being placated to like I would feel in America. And to be honest, like, similarly, in Ireland, talk was cheap, especially in a business context. Everybody would be talking about the next business idea, the next thing we're going to do. It's going to be absolutely deadly. We're going to all make loads of money. And that would be around the pub. But then the execution after that didn't really exist. And in France, things are much more to the point, and I appreciate that. It's more useful to have honest feedback, regardless of how the recipient feels about it. The next thing I'll chat about is the overall openness and the differences in each country I've lived in. The Irish and Americans are incredibly open and friendly, and to some extent the Brits as well, so it's incredibly easy to connect with everybody in these cultures. I'll be honest, the Parisians, much less so. That's a stereotype that, in my opinion, does ring true. But on the opposite side of the coin, people in the south of France are the most warm, welcoming, lovely human beings I've ever met in my entire life. And once you've broken through with them, you are connected for life. And so, on the opposite side of the coin is America. Common complaint I've heard from my family and friends is that Americans, or more specifically Californians, are surface level in their interactions. Sometimes the interactions or conversations you have with people doesn't have any substance behind it. You can sometimes feel like you've had a connection with a Californian, and after the end of it, you feel like you're best friends, only to never hear from that person again. And this can happen in a business or a social setting. And so my family members, when they'd live in California, they'd have this interaction with Californians or Americans and think, God, some of these conversations feel amazing, but they also feel a bit surface level and there's not too much underneath the surface. And all of this changes how I interact with a culture. So if I'm in California and I'm chatting to someone and they want to be my new best friend and they're all pally-pally, I'll take it with a massive grain of salt, and I won't be disappointed if they don't contact me. On the opposite side of the coin, if I'm chatting to a Parisian and they seem rude or standoffish in the beginning, I'll just say, look, it's part of the culture. This is what I've come to expect, but I know at the core they're a lovely human being. And once I break through that, they'll probably be a friend for life. Let's move on to another location. I've noticed that when I compare Los Angeles to Galway, London, and Paris, people's sense of personal space in Paris is insane. For instance, when walking down the streets here in Paris, I've noticed that 9 times out of 10, there is someone right behind you, clipping your heels, almost breathing down your neck. Jesus Christ, dude. Guy's as subtle as a hammer. And that aggravates me. But I get it. This is a dense city. There's a lot of people. At the same time, there's this unnecessary sense of urgency to get to places, and your personal bubble is just shrunk here compared to when you're in LA, where there's big roads, big cars, massive parking spots. Just growing up in California and then having the inverse of that over here has been something that's been tough for me to get used to. And I'll be honest, like, this sense of small bubbles and personal space is also reflected in how people drive over here. Now, I feel like I can have this opinion because I've driven in a lot of places in the world and experienced drivers from all over the world. I got my driver's license in California, I drove in Ireland for 4 years, and of course, big cities in California, it's stressful, it's chaos, it's hectic to drive around. In Ireland, it was an absolute breeze. Lovely drivers, very relaxed. And in London, even though it was a big city, it was filled with drivers who were English and rather polite all the time. And in France, and don't take this the wrong way, but you guys drive like maniacs over here. For a culture that emphasizes a slower pace of life, that sense of stop and smell the roses, when you guys get behind the wheel here, you are insane. Like, I've seen sweet old French ladies with a walker get behind the wheel of a car and they turn into Michael Schumacher, honking and cutting people off. And it's not like they're in a rush. It's not like they're trying to get to the ER. She's probably heading to a boulangerie to pick up a baguette. And in life, the French epitomize this theme of enjoy the journey, not the destination. So why doesn't that translate over to driving? I don't know. It's something I haven't figured out yet. Maybe if one of you guys has a better insight into this, write something in the comments. I've thrown a lot of ideas out there. Let me know what your cultural observations are in whatever country you're in, or any country that you've traveled to. And it opens your mind to the realization that there's many ways to solve a problem. There's many different cultural norms that are different to yours, and that's fascinating to me. I think travel and living in different cultures has given me a tremendous amount of respect, and I hope it will for you too. So get out there, go travel, and if you liked anything in this video, leave a like or a comment below, and I'll chat to you guys soon.